Welcome you. Very happy to have you here. I'm very excited about this program, and I think some of you are too. Just a few kind of housekeeping things first. I want to make clear that this is not a PSU program. We just meet here. We have no affiliation with PSU. We meet here because the Center for Women Politics and Policy is kind enough to sponsor us, which means we get a great room, and it's not a nominal rate. And it's a great central location as well. And the other, and I really thank them for that, for their generosity. And my other thank you goes to Joe Anybody, the man behind the camera, who is, has been so dedicated to recording, taping is not the right word anymore, recording all of my programs and getting them up on YouTube so that people who can't be with us can see them later, and you can tell people. And so it will be out in a few days usually, and I will, oh, and we even come up fairly close because we don't have microphones. We have the youngest activist in the room just came in. She is 3 months? 3 months, yes. Really happy to have you here. So I have a sign-up list on the back table there, along with evaluation forms, which I hope you will fill out. But the sign-up list is for our email list, and I will send an email out when the video is up, and I will also send one out when I get my next program going, which isn't set yet. I think it's going to be on education, progressive, experimental, Head Start, good kinds of education, but it's still in the very early stages. We also have a blog, and we have a Facebook page, and if you follow us on the Facebook page, you'll get an email, I think, whenever something gets posted, so that's another way to keep really
so Sandy, who is we?
History of Social Justice Organizing. It's really me now.
And who are you?
I'm Sandy Polishuk. I'm a historian and an activist, and I just wanted to share some activist history in the city. I've been doing this for almost 2 years. And I also want to thank Kebu. I think she left the room, but she's got her. They are recording it. They're not broadcasting it live tonight. They do sometimes, but they weren't able to tonight. But it'll be on Kebu eventually, and if I find out when, I'll also send out an email. They usually tell me. I'll send an email out when they're going to be broadcasting it. Just a quick, I'd love to know how you heard about this event. Did you get an email? Good. Facebook? Flyer? Great. Word of mouth?
Always one.
Or two. Okay, well, okay, that's all the business. So you may have noticed that there are only 2 people at the table, and depending on when you first heard the publicity, you might have expected 3 or 4. Paula Nielsen, who has written for the LGBT press from 1976 through the 90s. She wrote for The Fountain, Cascade Voice, Eagle News Magazine, City Open Press, City Week, Oregon Gay News, Alternative Connection. Unfortunately, she's been under the weather with the flu, so it was too much for her, and I'm glad that she's taking care of herself, because this would be much too much energy when she's sick. The other person we had originally scheduled to be here is Judith Barrington, and she had to drop out about a month ago. because she wrote, I'll come to that. I asked her what she wanted me to say, so I want to read that. Judith Barrington, who wrote features for Ragtimes in the late 70s, would have been here, but is recuperating from brain surgery and not able to leave home for a few months. She is recovering. I added that. Her Ragtime features included pieces on racism, comparative worth, feminism and ecology, S&M, battered women in prison, book reviews and interviews, including ones with Audre Lorde and Adrienne Rich. Her work was funded by a CETA grant and was sometimes cut down to make an op-ed length piece published in the Oregonian. She went on to become the West Coast editor of Mother Root Journal and to write for the Oregonian Sunday magazine. She's since published 5 poetry books, a Lambda Book Award-winning memoir, and a text on writing the memoir. For 18 years, her and her partner, Ruth Gundel, ran the Flight of the Mind writing workshops for women. So, very sad she can't be with us, but I'm hoping maybe after her recovery, which is going to be some months, we can figure out a way for her to do something for us then. So, the people we do have, and I'm disappointed that the others aren't here, but I'm not distressed because I know we're still going to have a really great program because we have 2 fabulous gay press pioneers here in the room. We have Paula Nielsen, who served as a feature writer. I'm sorry, I just looked at my wrong notes. We do not have Paula.
Way too short.
We have Renee. Renee LaChance. She covered lesbian events as the women's editor for the Northwest Fountain, served as the editor of the Cascade Voice, and co-founded and publisher of Just Out. Pride Northwest has presented her with 2 awards, the 2000 Spirit of Pride Award and the Pioneer Award, both for her work with Just Out. And we have Rupert Kinnard, who made that fabulous flyer. It's the best flyer I've ever had for this series. And that's because his extensive career in publication design began with Just Out as one of the original staff members, where he helped the publication win the National Gay Press Association Award for Best Overall Design in 1983. In 1996, while working as art director for The Scanner, Rupert won an award for Best Graphic and Typographical Excellence by the West Coast Black Journalist Association. So we're thrilled to have them. Penny, do you mind going first, since you were, your work in the gay press starts earlier.
On the left.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
And, and excuse me, and hold your questions, because we'll have a Q&A. Yeah, great, okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
I actually pronounce my last name LaChance, and I know it's no offense. That's okay, Sandy. Everybody does it. It's spelled LaChance. Everybody gets it wrong, but it's LaChance. So I always say that first. And thank you, Sandy, for inviting me to be here and for presenting these events. I just watched the one on lesbian and gay history that you did in November, I believe it was, and it was excellent with Cliff and Pat Young and a couple of
Steve Fulmer.
Susie Shepard and Steve Fulmer, right? So it was fun to watch them and be reminded of things I had forgotten about while I made my presentation. So the other thing I would have you know is that I am a timid public speaker. And those of you who know me know that me sitting up here at all is a major feat. And that I will burst into tears at the drop of a hat. Don't worry, I'm okay. You haven't hurt me, it's just who I am.
There's the hat.
The drop of a hat.
And I'm used to crying in public because whenever I have to speak, it happens. So I just push through and don't mind me. I just really think it's important to sit here and tell these stories and remind people of what our history was, because as I go out and about in the world, I find people who moved here in the 90s or after the Y2K, and they don't remember my years at Just Out, or they don't remember what we went through with the Oregon Citizens Alliance. And I think it's really important to keep reminding people of those things. So history, I was contemplating history. I spent my life, drop the hat. I spent my life documenting the present and creating a vehicle to get those words out. Now those words in that vehicle is history. And it's just difficult to wrap my head around that because I'm still very much in the present. And then when you think about history, it's always often, I should say often because I think it's changing, but it's often represented as chronological and linear, but it's not. Each point of history has its own versions, its own observations, its own conclusions, and they contradict one another. It's impossible to reflect the people, the hours, the bitter blow-ups, the fights, the daily celebrations that happen with each one of those points of history. And as a journalist, it was a challenge to document those events accurately. I learned early on that at any event, you had to talk to a number of people to find out what happened. Each person would perceive the event differently, and in the middle, where all the perceptions met, lay the truth. And so it was important to talk to people from different cultures, different perspectives, different regions, to get what was true so that I could present in the pages of Just Out, and then what we did with the staff, the most honest representation and the most unbiased representation of what was happening. So in 1978, I came out running, full steam ahead. There were so many wrongs to be righted, so much to do. I mean, I was 22. Where do you begin? The first thing I remember was California's Briggs Initiative in 1978 that would ban all gay and lesbian people from working in public schools. You know, as a kid, 20, 21, 22, this was happening. That just seemed unreal to me and extremely unjust. At the same time, Harvey Milk was elected as an openly gay man to serve San Francisco City Council. Then he was assassinated, and his murderer was sentenced to less than 8 years in prison by demonstrating a Twinkie defense. This was beyond my comprehension of justice. Then there was Anita Bryant with her no homo promos to save the children that got us all to boycott Florida orange juice. How did I learn of these events? From a monthly bar rag called Northwest Fountain that I would pick up at the bar at the end of the night when I didn't pick up anything else. I grew up with the Oregonian delivered to my house every day and read the paper all my life. I worked on my high school newspaper, so it turns out I had newspaper ink running in my veins. It didn't take long after reading about these issues in the Northwest Fountain before I wanted to be a part of the change. The injustices were all so wrong. I went to work for the Northwest Fountain as their women's page editor, which was laughable. How did that happen? Well, I asked the publisher, David Porter, I think this is how anybody gets involved in newspapers. I asked him, why wasn't there any news about women in his paper? And he said, why don't you write it? And so I did. He allotted me an entire page to cover half the community. At the time, I thought that was a great stride. I wrote about women's musicians like Holly Near, Chris Williamson, Mae Christian. I wrote about the happenings at the local feminist bookstore, Woman's Place. And I wrote about everything else I could flush out about lesbians in our community. Mostly because I was curious, because I was hanging out with a bunch of gay men. The community was very segregated back then. It was 1985, and lesbians were leery of the Northwest Fountain and David Porter and By association, me. So I didn't get all the information I wanted. Unbeknownst to me, David had issues with alcohol, underage boys, and meeting deadlines. Papers sometimes came out on time and sometimes it didn't. Even at age 22, I felt an obligation to the community and the advertisers to do better than that. Neil Hutchins came to me with an idea for a new publication called the Cascade Voice and asked me to join that effort. So I did. And I became the editor by its 3rd issue. That's where I met Jay Brown. With whom I would develop a very complicated relationship. We were family to one another over time. And we were the worst enemies to one another over time. And we were like husband and wife to one another sometimes. It was very complicated. But we did good work together. At the Cascade Voice, I was the editor, and he was my associate editor. Now, at the time, there were few lesbian and gay organizations in Portland in the 80s, and so questioning youth and those just coming out had few resources and even fewer positive role models. And the queer community was segregated by gender, race, ability, and politics. And remember, back then, everything was gay. Lesbian and gay wasn't there yet. That came later. And then lesbian, gay, and bisexual came after that. And then year after year, we just started adding letters to the alphabet until everyone felt included. And I think now we're up to LGBTQQI. Is that right, Melanie?
AA.
Oh, AA.
XYZ.
So, again, early 80s, I'm at the Cascade Voice. A press release came over the fax line. Now, back then, we didn't have email or the internet. Things came over a fax machine, and we went through, hundreds of pieces of paper every day. Well, the fax was from a mainstream health organization out of San Francisco, and it talked about a rare cancer that was affecting gay men. It was called Kaposi's sarcoma. They eventually started calling it the gay cancer. In this press release, they said that whatever was causing it would become an epidemic and kill thousands. I remember reading that, and it was so unbelievable that I could not believe it. I would not believe it. I could not print a word of it, because it just could not be true. I remember passing it around the office and talking about it with everybody there. We just all agreed, this must be some propaganda, something to make gay men quit being promiscuous. This cannot be real. And all I can think now is, wow, our denial was deep. And over the next decade, everything in that press release came true. So we're dealing with that. And around the same time, pride celebrations in the area were called Gay Pride. And women wanted to change the name to Lesbian and Gay Pride. So a community of people that called themselves TKO did monthly meetings for a year to talk about adding the word lesbian to gay pride. Come on, people! A whole freaking year, month after month, processing? Well, Jay and I would go to those meetings and we would listen to these people talk, and our consciousness was raised around feminism and racism and gender politics, and we decided that we wanted to bring that message to the Cascade Voice. And the publisher of the Cascade Voice at the time was Neil Hutchins, and he would have none of that. And we would have arguments and fights, and it just felt horrible. Jay and I got involved with Pride that year. He helped with the march, and I helped with the rally. And we were the lucky ones that year. It was when the white man showed up in blackface in an Aunt Jemima costume at the rally. Now, today you all reacted with horror. But then it was like, oh, he's just having fun, it's not racist, you can't make him leave. I was the organizer. I had a woman who was extremely upset by this person, and I could see that all the things that were wrong with his outfit, and I had to ask him to leave. Fortunately, I had the backup of a number of people. But that started a whole debate within the community about, oh, those feminist lesbians, that's not racist. Oh, we're just wanting to have fun. It's just a party, blah, blah. Well, after all of that, and all that process and all those discussions, Jay Brown and I just got tired of fighting with Neil Hutchins at the Cascade Voice and the other writers who were there at the time, and decided to start our own paper. We had just helped Neil start the Cascade Voice, so we thought, how hard could it be? We just did it. I was young and brash, and Jay believed in me, so off we went to Rupert, where we said, Rupert, we need a design for our paper. And he was like, oh yeah, you come to me when you're ready to print. Rolled his eyes. Well, 30 years later, it took that long for it to die, but we started just out, and we had world news and local news and reviews of music and theater and books. 1983. Calendar section, groups, listings, display ads. And let me tell you, that's the most important part of any newspaper, because without them, it doesn't get created or distributed. And our mission was simple: get the word out. The gay men and lesbians are everywhere, and everyone should come out, be visible, be proud of who they are. The closet was still the preferred place for a number of people in the 80s, and we believed that they needed to come out so that we could get our rights. We also felt that the segregation kept our community from reaching its full potential, so we dedicated ourselves to educating about differences and similarities that were important as well. We had discussions of internalized homophobia, racism, feminism, sexism, ableism. Routinely, these things appeared in the pages of Just Out, all to educate and inform our readers so we could become better people and create a more sustainable community. What we didn't know is how much we would need that community. Just Out had many national firsts during the 15 years I sat at her helm. We were the first queer publication anywhere to sustain itself with very little bar advertising. In the first 5 years, there was no bar advertising. Liberal-minded, non-gay advertisers were early adopters of our mission and supported us with their ad dollars. They continued to advertise because Just Out readers were loyal to them. We did surveys every 3 years to document our readers' preferences and loyalties, and this gave us numbers to back up our claims to the advertisers. Just Out readers switched buying loyalties to support businesses that advertise in Just Out. What that means is if your family always ate Miracle Whip, but suddenly Kraft mayonnaise is advertising, you'd switch to Kraft mayonnaise because it was in your paper. So we became a sought-after commodity. And after 17 years, it took us 17 years to secure a Subaru dealership. But what did that do to the Portland economy? How many of you have Subarus? We were the first gay paper to get press credentials to the Democratic National Convention. Jay Brown went in 1988, the year that Michael Dukakis was nominated for president. Do we even remember him? Just Out had a U.S. vice presidential candidate on our staff. Harold Moore was a staff member in 1988, and he was chosen by a non-major party candidate, Lenora Falani, to be her vice presidential candidate. And so he took a leave of absence to go run for vice president. He got very sick on the campaign trail and died of complications shortly after the election. So we became the glue, Just Out became the glue that held Oregon and Southwest Washington's community together during difficult times. The AIDS pandemic began in the 80s, and the queer community in Portland struggled with the loss of thousands. We had to create infrastructure, we had to create support systems, we had to create everything from scratch, and we had very little support from the government, certainly not the federal government. Ronald Reagan didn't mention AIDS until the late 80s. In 1990, Jay Brown would die of AIDS and leave me to pilot the paper with the help of a really great staff and the support of an engaged community. The Oregon Citizens Alliance then started its onslaught, brought ballot measures 8, 9, and 13 to voters during my tenure, created an environment of hate and violence that fractured our rainbow community. Ballot measure 8 overturned Governor Neil Goldschmidt's executive order that protected us. Ballot measure 9 would have mandated discrimination in Oregon's constitutional against lesbians and gay men. And ballot measure 13 was just, hey, let's try it again because we lost ballot measure 9, but we still had to fight it. After one of the debates, one of the first debates around ballot measure 8, Just Out reporter W.C. McCrae asked a woman who identified herself as a concerned woman, who was sitting next to him at the debate, how can you sit there and hear someone propose the death of people like me when I'm sitting here next to you? And she answered him, why, it's for your own good. After all of that, our community barely had the energy to recover. We had fought outside of us, we had fought inside of us. All we could do is just lick our wounds and try to heal ourselves. We came out of that time stronger. We had survived. We became more organized. We became more visible. We took more chances and risks, and we fought hard. Then it seems like a rainbow renaissance began to happen. Celebrities started coming out left and right, and it felt like Just Out's mission was finally a success. As everyone came out, it changed hearts and minds, because it was hard to vote against your neighbor or the guy who pumped your gas. Equality measures were passed jurisdiction by jurisdiction, state by state. Still, not half of the United States has equal protections for lesbians and gay men, but we will get there. Same-sex marriage is transforming before our very eyes and may be the catalyst for equality in many states. How can you allow us to marry but deny us employment or housing? We no longer need to furtively grab a gay paper on our way out of the bar and take it home in order to glimpse our lives in other people. Back then, we depended on these publications for news specific to our community, to find our culture, to find our commonality, to get our acceptance. Now, Equestrian youth just need to go to their smartphone and say, Siri, where do I find a gay bar in Portland? And she works for them, but not me because they're younger. And she gives them a bunch of links that answers all of their questions. It's just amazing. So now you can read about LGBTQ news in every urban paper, on internet blogs, on the television. But it's still important to have publications like the PQ Monthly that tell gay stories in a gay way without any interference from other people telling us how to talk. So Jay Brown used to say, when the Oregonian starts printing our news, there won't be a need for Just Out anymore. And then we would laugh, because that seemed so far out. And here we are. You know, I think we wonder about print media, but I still think it's important. The end.
And you didn't eat a box of Kleenex.
I did, but you know.
Oh.
Well, my name is Rupert Kinnard, and I want to start out by saying a few things. I'm honored to be here with Renee, and absolutely honored to have been a part of the beginning of Just Out.
Oh, thank you.
I really feel as if I would really tell Renee what I think about what it was like for me to be there in those first, in the beginning, but I don't want to be the cause of her crying. I also want to acknowledge someone in the audience who is really one of the reasons I am even able to speak in front of a crowd these days, and that would be Kathleen Sadai. I remember very vividly back in the 80s when I was admiring her for being able to speak in front of people. And she told me that she thought that I was someone who could do it. And I told her there was no way. I didn't think I was smart enough. And she really encouraged me and let me know that I was certainly bright enough and analytical enough, and I expressed myself well enough that I could do it. And it was only from that point on that I really believed I can do it, and I've been doing it now for quite a while. So I want to thank her. I want to acknowledge two people who are here to see me in their riffraff. They're sitting in the back. I won't name names, but if they act up, I want people to volunteer to put them out. I think some of my friends know who they are. One of the reasons I'm here is because I attended the last panel that Sandy was so gracious to arrange and organize, the history of Portland's lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and questioning community. And I was very moved by that panel. And that panel featured Steve Fulmer, Susie Shepard, Cliff Jones, and Pat Young. And it was quite an intense panel, being a gathering of people who were talking about the history of the queer community here in Portland. One of the things they talked about, a number of things, they talked about the history of Portland Town Council, which was one of the first queer organizations here in Oregon. They talked about the PSU anti-war protests and how those protests went hand in hand with civil rights marches in the country and lesbian and gay liberation at that time. Political power of queer music with the formation of the Gay Men's Chorus. They talked about the HIV epidemic and how it brought a new degree of visibility of specifically of gay men, and the lesbian community that was very supportive in those struggles. The formation of PFLAG in Oregon, and Cliff Jones specifically shared his perspectives about our history as Black people and people of color in the queer community here in Portland. Each one of those subjects, I thought, would really benefit from having a panel of people. So it was really incredible to have so much talked about, within a short period of time. And even my being here, I don't mind sharing some of my history with the lesbian and gay press, the queer press here in Portland, knowing that all I want to do is share a little bit of my background, because the main reason I become involved in these gatherings is because of the question and answer. I really more appreciate a dialogue than just, talking with people from this position. So with all the things that were talked about during that panel, it struck me that a discussion of queer history of the Portland's queer community, any panel discussion of it, it struck me that the two things that I missed was a discussion of the queer press, because so much of what was talked about on that panel, the way the community found out about those things, was through the queer press. And the other thing that I think would probably really work well in a panel discussion is the power and the influence of the bars, both the lesbian bars and the gay male bars. I really thought that was another one of a key piece of our history in this city. A little bit of my personal history is I was born in Chicago, and I struggled with obviously my identity as a gay man and my identity as an African American. And I wanted to share just a few things having to do with one of the reasons that I became an activist within the gay community. And I want to take it back to being in high school, because I thought show and tell was a really good part of how you present things. So this was the front runner was a book that I read and very influential for a lot of gay men of my generation. The second big influence for me was the play and the movie Boys in the Band. And a lot of gay men really have issues with this play and the movie, but for me, it was very powerful and very positive. And the last publication that really influenced me was this book, The Word Is Out. This was a groundbreaking book when it came out because it was really my first introduction to the whole concept of coming out. And the interesting thing about this was it really moved me, and after the book was published, there was a documentary made, and I saw the documentary, and really, that was really wonderful for me. And it was a way, it was a good, diverse, this was really one of the first books that I read that really gave me a sense of how diverse the community was. It was a way that it introduced me to a lot of the issues that lesbians were struggling with. And it wasn't until recently, about a month ago, I looked through this book, and even though this book was here basically to share coming out stories, and it has photos of the people, it didn't have any of the people's last names. So even though it was even about coming out, it wasn't even coming out to the point that they were comfortable enough to use their last names.
Yeah.
So I attended college in Iowa, Cornell College, and during that time, at one point, I created a comic character called the Brown Bomber. And the reason I mentioned that the Brown Bomber is because he ended up being a character featured in a comic strip that ran in my college newspaper every week. When I graduated, towards the end of my college years, I had the comic character who had been in the newspaper for a couple of years come out as a gay character. Oh, cool. And it was really quite a step because people on the campus had really gotten used to the Brown Bomber as almost like a school mascot. And so the connection with that and my moving to Portland was that when I moved to Portland, I really wanted to figure out a way to keep the Brown Bomber going. So I sought out a local lesbian and gay newspaper to see if they wanted to run the comic strip in that newspaper. And so the first newspaper ended up being Northwest Fountain. And the Brown Bomber, the comic strip, ran in the Fountain for a very short period of time. And then I stopped working with the Fountain and started doing illustrations for the Cascade Voice, which is when I met Renee and Jay. And at the time, the reason they came to me when they decided to create a new newspaper is that I was doing design work for Willamette Week. So I had really kind of gained my design chops working with Willamette Week. And it is true, when they came to me and said they were going to start a new newspaper, I chuckled because Cascade Voice was the big kid on the block. So it seemed unimaginable that they would topple, you know, the big guy. But it is just so important for me to share with you the idea that Just Out was truly born out of wanting to represent the entire community. And I was frustrated with the Cascade Voice for their coverage and their you know, the lack of diversity represented in those pages. So it was really frustrating. So during that time, I was also doing some work for Portland Town Council. And one of the things I did for Portland Town Council that I was really proud of was that I was producing and designing their newsletter. And so it's really interesting to me the relationship of newsletters at that time with the lesbian and gay publications that were being printed. Because there was a lot about those newsletters of different organizations that was another way of getting news out to the community. I also ended up being on the board of directors of Portland Town Council. And so that was another position there that I really enjoyed. I really feel like the growing pains of our community in terms of us trying to understand the diversity and the differences of opinions in our community was reflected in the pages of Just Out and lesbian and gay publications across the country. It was within the pages, it was in our community when there was that discussion about adding lesbians to, gay pride. That was in our community, and that discussion and that controversy was reflected not only in Portland newspapers, but I think publications around the country. I think it was the obligation of the queer press at every point of its history to be honest enough to really represent the entire community within that community. I liked that being a part of the queer press, our obligation was to share with the community local news, national news, and international news. I thought that was really a wonderful thing that papers really accomplished. I feel like identity analysis happened within the pages of our publications. Really analyzing, as Renee said, there was a point where the community was only known as the gay community, then the lesbian and gay community, then lesbian, gay, bisexual. And I think it was really a great obligation to encourage the communities that, our community to have a lot of those discussions. So I feel like at where we are right now with our publications, and one of the things I really wanted to do here was really celebrate the history of what we have accomplished. But the other thing is to realize where we were then and where we are now. And I feel like where we are now is a result of the power of coming out. As Renee said, there's no way, as we kept coming out, there's no way that people can say that they don't know a lesbian, gay, transsexual, bisexual person. And it's I guess the other thing, coming out led us where we are now, and as Renee also said, the popularity of the internet is something that makes me reflect on, what the challenges are for the publications of today. I think Renee really got it right. It's the place where you really get more a sense of your community. It's not as immediate as the net, but I just think it's another, there's a great place for the publications that are out now, for our community. Excuse me, lost my notes. Just recently, I was in the car with Scott, and we drove past a high school, and we saw two young men holding hands, and it was a really great thing to see, and it was a really wonderful way to reflect on the part that a number of us have played in getting, young people to where they are today. And I think there's just something really humbling and something really, I think, for us to be proud of, those of us who have been involved in the lesbian and gay press, the queer press. And I just really am grateful to be here to talk a little bit about other people's perception of what the community press has meant to them, and would really like to have that discussion. Thanks.
Put Tom Potter on the cover, as a police chief. I don't know whether that had ever happened before. And then, you put Kathleen Sadat was on the cover during the height of the ballot measure 9 stuff, and that was kind of a big deal.
That had never happened before.
So can you talk about a couple of those things?
Well, I love telling the story of how we got the name Just Out, because it was an August afternoon. Jay and I had decided to leave the Cascade Voice, and we knew if we had it, we had to have a name for the paper, because I need to work that way. So we took Jay's trusty Rose Jay's thesaurus down to Waterfront Park with my little dog Punky, a little black and white curly thing. And we laid on the grass, enjoyed the sun, and got out the book and started thinking, well, what are we going to call it? Well, it's got to be out. Yeah, it's got to be out. Well, let's look up out. Okay, let's look up out. So we're looking out, up, out in the thesaurus, and it says something, something, just out, something, something. We woke up and that's it, just out. And we knew instantly, and after that, we were ready to go.
That's almost as good as the Sacramento paper, gay paper, Mom, guess what?
One of the other things that I would want to share too is after working with Just Out in the beginning, eventually moving to the Bay Area, I immediately started working with a number of publications there. I worked for a paper that was called Coming Up, which eventually changed to the Bay Times. And then from there, I ended up working for a San Francisco Sentinel. And I worked there for a couple of years as art director. The reason I bring that up is working with those papers, I ended up being a part of the National Lesbian and Gay Press Association at that time. And one of the things I really appreciated when the conference was held in San Francisco one year, and then I think the next year it was held in Boston. One of the most impressive things that happened was that I was there basically representing a Bay Area newspaper, but so many of the other representatives of lesbian and gay newspapers all over the country, when they found out that I had been associated with Just Out, it was amazing to me the presence Just Out had in the consciousness of so many other publications. So it really was so much more of a trailblazer than I think people in Portland ever knew.
That's because we broke the advertising mold and blew their minds.
Well, it was that and there was
Oh, and we included lesbians, yeah. That was
right. And I have to say, it also has something to do with design.
Oh, yes.
Because,
And we had such a beautiful, well-put-together publication.
she says that now, but
No,
see,
no, I mean it.
when I would go back and look at old issues of Just Out, I'd be horrified, thinking, ooh, they were awful, but I would remember that we got that award. Our first year in existence, we got the Lesbian and Gay Press Association Award for Design. And I only say that because the idea that Just Out, every lesbian and gay queer newspaper around the country, we all had subscriptions to other newspapers.
Yes.
So they would get Just Out and they would look at Just Out and they'd kind of look at their paper. And I like to believe that they were basically saying we need to step it up. And it was something about representing our community with newspapers that looked like they were high school newspapers. It was still important to get the information out, but there was something about the visual representation that didn't make the paper seem as serious. So, that was another thing that I do think that we really, knew that we were doing around the country, was really kind of setting another standard for the way the papers were presented.
Well, we had a style manual. We had, if we were going to do a certain type of story, it would be in a certain font. The headline would look like this. The body copy would look like this. Nothing was left to chance in the design. Rupert came up with this style manual that we followed to the T. And also we had an editorial style manual that Marvin Moore created for us. He was the most, Marvin, if you're here, forgive me, but you were the most anal, compulsive, but that's what we needed. He created, if you're going to write this word, you write it this way every time. If you're going to use this phrase, you're going to say it this way every time. It's like, who knew all this stuff needed to be put into writing? Don't you just, type and go, type and go. No, you have to do it this way. And we did. And having those standards and that protocol really helped with anything that ever came up. How are we going to handle this story? How are we going to do the graphics for this? It was always just spelled out.
So
And when
how do you
new
feel-
words came along.
How do you feel about the Oregonian?
Oh my God, the Oregonian now is driving me nuts. Typos on their cover.
Are you
They
serious?
starting sentences with dollar signs and numerals. Oh, I'm gonna take my red pen, go through it, and send it back to them. But I wanted to answer Pat's second question, which is my favorite issue.
Yeah, do you have one?
I don't, but I am partial to the first issue with the dyke domes on the cover, and that was our baby.
Larry?
Yeah,
Go
I'd
ahead.
like to make a comment. I really like the newspaper format for getting information. Because I can go through that quickly or shortly and get wonderful information that I didn't know was there, that I wouldn't find on the internet. Through your paper, I found Miss Renee, an extraordinary tarot reader. I got an Gay and Gray Expo because I found that information there. That it's all right there, and you can go real fast, go real slow. There's so much information that you can't find anywhere else. And I think the physical paper, for me, is very, very valuable.
Kathleen?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I thought you played an important role in education and facilitating discussion by allowing lots of different opinions to appear in the paper, and which kept people reading and thinking and sometimes getting entrenched, but often being willing to enter into a dialogue about differences, about direction, ideas. And I thought that was an important service that a newspaper should serve, but often does not.
Follow up on that with a question, because as you're talking about your purpose with Just Out and hearing you say that, as a reader that was fulfilled, this idea of creating this space for this dialogue, creating a space for diversity within the community. And I'm sure a lot of us have found the problem of when we are online, it's very easy to read the things that we agree with and nod with, and not to have to, you have to work a little bit harder to find that. So, I mean, my question is a little bit, if you want to care to comment on that idea, or if you have suggestions about publications or online or print or whatever that you think are continuing that kind of work and doing it well.
PQ Monthly.
Thank you.
Yes,
PQ
PQ Monthly, local.
combines the paper with a good internet presence, including a Facebook presence, and these women do a great, and their staff do a great job in educating us, I think.
Thank you.
You mentioned several newspapers, and there's one I haven't heard, and I don't know how long it was around, I just know I was familiar with it. The Alternative Weekly, could you give me a background of who they were, how long they were here, what happened,
Was it weekly or connection, alternative connection?
Alternative Connection.
Alternative Connection.
I think that was
Was that?
just at the same time as Just Out briefly, I don't know.
Yeah, it was a newspaper.
Well, there was City Week. and
Alternative
there-
Connection is in Paula's bio.
Well, that's interesting. Were they based out of Portland?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were affiliated with an organization, the name of which I cannot remember at this time.
There's also the Lavender Network out of Eugene.
Well, they were
Rag
here.
Times.
I mean, I did some writing for them, that's why I
Yeah,
asked.
but I mean, they were based.
I didn't really know much about them.
Well, is that the bar guy?
Yeah, I don't know much about that paper.
How
There was
recent,
also.
I'll remember at 3:00 in the morning.
There was also the paper that Melanie Kay ran out of the third floor of the Women's Center over on Everett, under a cedar lamp.
Was that the right
I
time?
remember the building.
No, it wasn't the right time. It was somebody's name.
Early,
At 3 o'clock when you're up, I'll call it.
early to mid-90s.
Marilyn Kay or somebody like
Sounds
that, yeah.
sounds vaguely familiar.
The Pearl Diver, remember that?
Um,
That was a separatist magazine. No, it was a separatist
That was before my time.
Pearl Diver, that was definitely lesbian.
importance of being out and visibility and you know, having examples of and role models in the community. Nowadays, when you know, a celebrity comes out or an author comes out or just some kid's coming out story makes it viral on the internet, something I see a lot of and hear a lot of from people who aren't queer is that you know, it coming out doesn't really matter anymore, or it shouldn't matter anymore, because you know, we should all just accept one another anyway. What are your guys' kind of thoughts on this attitude? Because I've seen it like on the uptick in the last couple of years. So I mean, just from my age group is what I've seen. But what's your guys' kind of opinion on that?
You want to take that or?
My memory of the first time I even heard of or understood the concept of coming out, it seemed like such a small personal thing. You know, if you were coming out, you were like coming out to your family just so they can accept you. When I look back now, it was an incredibly powerful part of the movement. And I always associated with Harvey Milk. You know, he in San Francisco running for Board of Supervisors. He was one of the main people in our history that I remember really made it a point of kind of expanding on coming out to just coming out to your community. It's interesting just to see the evolution of this idea of coming out, because I think it has served us really amazingly well from the very beginning, and the evolution of people constantly coming out and making more and more people know that, you know, we're everywhere. It is interesting what's happening now in terms of people coming out. I think one of the most recent ones for me that I think there was some controversy about a little bit was Robin Roberts, African-American woman who's a newscaster, or she's the one of the anchors on one of the morning shows. And when she there was something about, she recently went through cancer treatment, and in her talking about so much of her life, she never did mention that she was a lesbian. And then after that, she ended up coming out. And I thought it was odd that when she was talking about her life initially and everything having to do with what her struggles were, you know, where she didn't come out at that time, but she did come out later. I am curious what other people might think of what coming out, the difference between what coming out meant in the earlier years and coming out now.
It's been several years now, but back in the day when Ellen DeGeneres had her sitcom, I remember many people coming up to me and saying, you gotta write a letter, you gotta write a letter. And everybody was writing letters to her or her people, asking for her to come out. And then she did, and her career took a dive for a long time. And now she talks about her wife, who is a woman, on national television all the time. And they appear together and they get, you know, there's news about them, and she doesn't even hesitate, you know, to own her lesbianism.
Mary?
Well, I just read a story today about the students in that Seattle high school who are demonstrating for their vice principal, who was fired because he came out as having married his male partner. And that's happening all over. The Catholic Church is doing this all over the country. If you come out as a married gay person, it's almost like coming out as a gay person. Now it's coming out as a married gay person. Right. Suddenly that's like, you know, you're getting fired.
There was a gal who got expelled from a religious college actually because a video of her girlfriend proposing to her went viral and someone at the college saw it and she got kicked out and her scholarship got revoked and they sued her for the scholarship money so that she had to pay it back.
Whoa.
Because when she joined the college, she
Oh, right.
signed a student conduct code or something, and because it was a religious college, they banned homosexual conduct, and so, yeah, that still happens.
Yes, I think coming out is,
It's
it's
still
getting more nuanced now. It's not just.
I
what you're
personally
gay.
still think it's important, but that's just something that,
Yeah.
you know, I hear a lot of people
someday
debate
that'd
about
be
in my age
nice.
group.
I think I heard you ask about, with all the people, the celebrities coming out,
Right,
how important is it at this point?
right.
And as soon as you said that, I could just see high school students who are still being bullied.
Yeah,
And every time another celebrity comes out, it helps those young kids who are still in the closet to gain strength to be who they really are.
I definitely agree.
And athletes.
And
Yes.
I know that it probably shocked everybody when
Celebrities.
Ryan Boitano came out recently.
Shocked, I'm just, woo,
Kathleen.
Kathleen.
Yeah, first of all, I wonder how many people were surprised at Robin Roberts coming out.
Not at all. I claimed it on my Facebook, and everybody was arguing with me. I go, are you serious? Look at your basketball picture.
So I think the answer is already been given. As long as there are people getting beat up, as long as there are young people killing themselves,
Yeah.
as long as there's a fight about marriage, as long as there are fights about civil rights, then people need to keep coming out. Also, I think that a lot of us live in a bubble. We're surrounded by people who think like us. And so we think that everybody outside of that bubble thinks like us, and they don't. And depending on where you live and the context you're existing in, this can be incidental and nobody cares, or it can be a really hard thing in your life. So until it gets better for 99.9% of the folks.
If I can talk about it, because I've been in Portland since '83 and I grew up with Just Out. Coming out, when I came out in 1979, I was 18 years old, and it was a big deal for me. I mean, it was like this weight lift off my shoulder. I think now, kids come out when they're 10. They're like,
Yeah.
Mom, I'm gay. And the mom is like, okay, that's no problem. So, I mean, I was afraid I was going to get hurt or something. It was a very different thing. But I think it's generational. I think your younger generation, for sure, it's like you don't really see color anymore. You don't have countries. Everything's global. It's much more loving and an accepting environment than when we had to fight to come out and risk getting beat up and stuff. But I think the more that people come out all the time and just tell their friends at a younger age, it's going to get better, and the generations coming up, it's not a big deal anymore. Like biracial marriage is not a big deal. Like
Depends on
being
where
Jewish
you
is
are.
not a big deal.
Depends on where you are. It depends on where
That's
you
true, but
live.
it's not as big of a deal anymore as it used to be. And I mean, these things are all changing, and it's the younger people that are just becoming more acceptant, and it's not a big deal. We're just getting more globalized.
I just want to emphasize that it does depend on where you are and what your context is. The other thing is, remember, we're being pushed back on. That whole big thing about Scott Lively in Uganda and now being tried on crimes against humanity, that's a global thing. He couldn't do it here in Oregon, so he went to Africa. Believe me, he left some people here in Oregon ready to pick up where he left off.
He's also behind what's happening in Russia.
Yes, yes.
Scott is?
Scott Lively, yeah.
Yeah, I would just say along that point, I work with Mark over on 24th and Sandy, and a lot of those youth are still going through it. So I do think it depends, even locally and generationally, it depends on who your parents are, depends on what school you're at, depends on what neighborhood you're from. So, but I have a question just for you as in sort of an editor role. I'm also in that role. I manage a bunch of different queer voices, and it's hard because I feel like part of my intention in highlighting queer voices is to bring to light the pain that a lot of us go through, most of us go through, and have carried around our histories of pain. And in that, there's a complicated thing that happens in that sometimes the writers are not totally processed around that pain. And so I guess I'm guessing that's not a new phenomenon. You know, to have queer people writing bad things about other queer people, or to not be able to take the lens outside of the bubble, or even, you know, writing about ourselves in ways that are potentially harmful. So I'm constantly feeling this balance of like, how do I not censor queer voices and queer experiences? How do I use the word queer with one part of the population and then not hurt another part of the population that perhaps hasn't reclaimed it in this room probably even. And so it's, you know, I'm curious as to the methodology around how do you manage a 38-person contribution staff, or how do you let everybody have a platform, the same platform, without silencing everybody?
Well, we had a lot of meetings. And we would listen to one another, and we would get a lot of those emotions out before we tackled a subject. And sometimes we'd have to have a meeting to talk about how this is a huge issue in our community. How are we going to deal with this, and reach a consensus that we all agreed to and abided by. And a lot of that was, you know, that rigidity was around. We already had it in place with the style manual, the graphic style manual, and the editorial style manual. So then it kind of became an ethics and editorial style manual that we created too, that we wouldn't badmouth people, we would be as kind as possible, we would be as honest as possible without having to hurt anybody in the process, and we didn't take things, and we weren't required to print things from people that violated any of those policies. If the person had some good information that they were writing about and we wanted them to still participate, then we would assign a writer or editor to sit down with them and work it through. And we were building a community. We were creating things out of nothing. We were developing people, I guess. I still look back at it and I'm just in awe at what we did. It's like, well, and I think we were able to do it because we just didn't know any better. But you just have to be kind, gentle, listen, and have some boundaries. And I'd be happy to come and talk with you anytime.
Great.
Do you still have that style guide?
I bet I know somebody who does.
Okay.
Kelly. I bet Kelly still has it. I don't know, it could be at the Glappin office for all I know. They took all the stuff from just out. But it's all up here too.
Cool.
The other challenging thing that I think happened at Just Out was from the very beginning, Renee and Jay decided that in a way, the Just Out started out more like a news magazine, in that one of the things that challenged the newspaper was that we were committed to having featured stories.
Mm-hmm.
And from the very beginning, Renee and Jay had laid out a number of issues within the community that they wanted to cover, and they wanted to specifically go out and do interviews and really highlight things that were going on in the community that wasn't necessarily, you know, connected to news. You know,
Role models.
right, lesbian and
There's a lot of
gays
role
and
models.
their and spirituality, being in the closet, bisexuality, and people getting, you know, one was out of the closet into marriage or something, you know, kind of people being married and one person being gay in the closet or something. But
Yes, married as a heterosexual couple, not as we
right.
can do it now.
I think that was something, that was another thing that I think affected other publications, that you could still have all the local news and everything, but every issue, if you spotlighted something that would make you go out and do some research then and see what people thought, what it was like to be a lesbian and gay and growing older was one of the features. So that was another thing that I really thought that made Just Out at the time when it came out was a lot different from other queer publications.
Well, plus we had regular columns that, like we had columns from people who lived in rural parts of the state. Billy Russo
That was
wrote a
a big
column
deal.
for us out of Roseburg. He started the Ruby House for people with HIV and AIDS to have a place to live. He had people, He paid lumber company moguls to traffic people from Portland down to his house, because there wasn't any place up here for them yet. You know, we hadn't gotten it together, with our house hadn't come about, and Cap was still getting it together. And he was able, in Roseburg, of all places, to be welcomed in his community, and the community took care of these sick people. I mean,
In Roseburg,
in Roseburg, in Douglas County. I mean, I don't even think you could,
where people had chainsaws and axes and things.
yeah, guns.
Wow.
And gun racks.
Yeah, gun racks. Yeah.
And guns on those gun
Otherwise,
racks.
I was like, come on.
What,
I'd like to revert to a comment that you made, these celebrities coming out is kind of commonplace. I came out in '71, and that was the first time there was a Gallup poll, not on gay, homosexuality. Very, very negative. And people, celebrities now come out, it's safe. It's safety in numbers. Up until a few years ago, gay rights came about by judicial. Now, voters are voting with it, and it's because it started at the micro level.
Right.
People coming up.
Right.
So Catherine's right. You know, are we in a post-racial society? No. We have an African-American president, but we don't have a post-racial society. And, you know, people are coming out, but it's still a challenge. So I think we're naive to think, oh, this is nice in Mobile, or in Portland, or in Poughkeepsie, whatever.
And
We
the other
aren't post-fad, you know, or whatever. We aren't post-racial. We have gone a long ways since 1971 versus
one of the things I'd like to say is, first of all, you're both great speakers, and you should do more public speaking. You're outstanding. When you think about it, one of the reasons we're here is we survived some of the worst days of our movement. We survived the AIDS crisis, and we survived those horrible, horrible anti-gay ballot measures. And when you think about it, especially on the ballot measures, would we have made it through were it not for the reporting that you did? We made it. People talk about how we Measure 9 brought us together, but it wouldn't have brought us together if we hadn't worked hard to defeat it and also have been victorious over it. What you did by educating people, informing people, helped us defeat it and made our movement stronger and puts us in the better position we are today. So thank you for what you did.
All right.
If I could just say something about, you guys were talking about how relevant publications are in this day and age with the internet. It goes back to kind of what you were saying, I think, in my opinion, that the Oregonian or any paper like that is, we're not their target market. Their target market is pretty much Anglo-Americans, mainstream. I say Anglo because it's all white owned and stuff. So there is need for publications that we call niche publications, the Hispanic News of the World, for the Hispanics, the Jewish Reporter for the Jewish people. I mean, look how old the Jewish community is, and they still have their own publications. Because nobody's gonna tell their story from an I point of view. It's gonna, like if it's told by the Oregonian or whomever, it's gonna be from they type of point of view, so those people. So that's why publications are so important. With PQ Monthly, I mean, Melanie is doing a great job, and the motto is every letter of color everywhere. And it is just, it's just really important to support that voice, because the internet's great and all, but holding a paper is important. It solidifies a community. I mean, we have the Scanner, we have the Asian Reporter, we have Hispanic News, we have the Jewish Review, I mean, the Chinese Times, you name it. There's still a publication that's relevant, even though everybody can get news on Google or whatever. Sure.
I think an example of what you're talking about also is at one point for a period of time, Willamette Week had one column, and it was by a gay man. And so it was this one column, and then at some point, for whatever reason, they decided to stop running the column. So it really gave you a real sense of how disposable that voice was. They had this little voice in the midst of their paper for a while, and even that voice was one small part of our community. But at one point, they took them out, and they're fine letting that go.
Well, rumor has it with that particular book, Rupert, with that particular voice, that he was told to write kind of a catty, you know, a little bit on the catty side. And I remember
Yeah.
reading it all the time going, this guy doesn't relate to me. I don't relate to this kind of cattiness.
Yeah.
I don't feel that, you know, and so I stopped reading it, you know, because it didn't represent me.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have anger and cattiness toward anybody, you know, so.
Those were the papers from the 60s.
Yeah.
The gay papers from the 60s had all that cattiness. Now, I mean, look how far we've evolved.
Yeah.
Amazing.
All of that militantness, I think, was needed to a degree. I mean, the angry lesbians I grew up with in Eugene, you know, the separatists, they were needed because it got a voice going. But now I feel, I've traveled the world, and I feel that, you know, I come out wherever I go, and people welcome me. I don't care what color they are or where they're from. And I feel very safe and comfortable in most places I go. And I think people are just evolving more. But there was a time that we needed militant. I don't think now, I think now we can do it with love.
Here's the thing though, and here's what needs to be recognized. And I don't get choked up in public, so you know. But it's the people in this room that have opened those doors and who have fought those battles and who have paved the way. Because anywhere I travel in the world, I mean, people ask me, they're like, you're a Latina, you're a Mexican, and you own this like Spanish bilingual paper, and then you own this gay paper, this LGBTQ paper and stuff. And here's the reality, it's because you all put your best foot forward.
Yep.
You all recognize the diversity and the need for us to all have those very important conversations. You made us look good, and thank you. You made us sound good, and creating those authentic conversations, not those conversations that rip each other apart. That's not journalism. That will never be journalism. That's Empire. There's no room in any of our communities for any of that stuff. And what I'm grateful for is because had you all not stepped up, I mean, it's easy to throw something up on the internet, good Lord, but to dedicate thousands of dollars every single month, thousands upon thousands of dollars every single month, to represent your community and all of those voices, that's something for real. And I am humbly thankful for everything that you have done, because this little brown girl and this team that we've assembled and everybody we tried to write about, we're carrying your spirit forward, and I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for all that you've done for us. Thank you.